Hi everybody, it's Tom Woods. I'm here with the great Brian McClanahan, who holds a PhD in history from the University of South Carolina, and he is the author of numerous books, including The Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution, The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Real American Heroes, and is co-author with the heroic and great Dr. Clyde Wilson, co-author of Forgotten Conservatives in American History. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the Constitution, because you figure a guy who writes books like this ought to know a little something. So we're going to run that by him. Brian, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, so you write a book called The Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution. Obviously you have some kind of, there has to be some way of interpreting the Constitution, some kind of a lens, some kind of a framework for making sense of it. What's your framework?
Well, generally when people say they're going to interpret the Constitution in any type of manner, they're going to look at John Marshall, or they're going to look at Alexander Hamilton. But the way I approach the Constitution is how the Constitution was ratified. So how did the states say the Constitution will be interpreted when it was ratified in 1787 and 1788? And I think that's the Constitution which you follow. That's the originalist Constitution. So oftentimes you don't get taught that in school, whether it's as an undergraduate, graduate student, or even in law school. You know, if you talk to lawyers who have had a con history class, they're not taught the Constitution, particularly the Constitution as ratified. So if we're talking about particular issues, if you want to go back and look at, say, this particular clause, the General Welfare Clause or the Supremacy Clause, well, how did the founding generation say those clauses would be interpreted when the Constitution was ratified itself? And what you find is that all these modern interpretations where these things have been expanded out are incorrect. So I wanted to put that in the book, and of course the book is a clause-by-clause look at the Constitution from that founding perspective, from that ratification perspective.
So on a practical level, or in a way that seems less abstract to people, what's the difference between the Constitution you're talking about and the Constitution that students have taught to them, particularly in law schools?
Well, certainly, I think the major difference is that these clauses that are so often abused shouldn't have been abused. In fact, the Federalists who were arguing, or as I say in the book, the proponents of the Constitution, said these things would never be abused. Don't worry, citizens. We're not going to abuse these powers.
Don't.
And, right, and of course they are. So, and I put quote after quote in the book where it said, okay, this is how it's going to, and from people like James Wilson, who was one of the most ardent nationalists in the Philadelphia Convention, or of course Hamilton himself said that these things would not be abused. So that's the way that we should be taught the Constitution, but we're not. In fact, we're taught that, well, we have Hamilton's opinion on the Bank of the United States, and we have Marshall's opinion in McCulloch v. Maryland. These are the bedrock opinions of constitutional. This is how they should be interpreted. We have Joseph Story's commentaries.
Right, yeah,
and
exactly.
So that's not correct. I mean, this is how they said the opposite when the Constitution was being ratified.
Yeah, exactly. So the Hamilton, and then Marshall, and then Story, and then Webster,
right,
and all these people, that's the version that everybody gets. And that's also the version, by and large, that the conservatives who are trying to correct things and say, right, hey, here's our free online course on the Constitution, you're going to get the same old, I was going to say a bad word,
right,
but the same old bad nonsense, right, that you would basically get in the law schools, right? They're going to be championing John Marshall. If you're going to champion John Marshall, you have no right to complain about the situation today.
Exactly right. And we're getting a nationalist view of the Constitution. And it's unfortunate because that nationalist view that won out in the 19th century has just distorted our view of the Constitution today. And so you're right. If you take these free online courses, we all know what we're talking about, and you look at their readers, it's saturated with Lincoln and everyone else saying this is how the Constitution should be interpreted. And of course, Lincoln was just channeling all these other nationalists you mentioned before. So we're really in a bad state. If we could get back to this original Constitution, we'd be in a lot better shape.
And of course, and the nationalist approach of the Constitution is based on this preposterous idea that the Union came first and then there were the states, that we were one people in some mystical sense. And I remember Clyde and I were at an academic conference 10 years ago, and it was on the nationalist versus the compact theory of the Union. Now, the Jeffersonians taught the compact theory. The states came first. Well, duh. Just look at the history. And we had one person in that seminar who said to us, because it was Clyde and me against 10 other people, and one of their people said, all right, you guys are obviously correct as the history goes, but our view is more poetic. What does that mean?
Well, Clyde will even tell you, well, don't say compact theory because that gives the other side ammunition.
It's not a theory. It's compact fact.
It's the compact truth is what he says, right?
That's
the truth.
All right, so now you and Kevin Gutzman, the most recent biographer of James Madison, The two of you collaborated on a real course on the Constitution, not the left-wing version, not the version in your textbooks, and not the version that the conservatives think they're correcting it with, which is 80% what the left-wingers are teaching. But you actually, I wanted an actual course on the Constitution from a Jeffersonian perspective. So I asked you, and I asked Kevin Gutzman. So how is that different from what I would get if I just, if I went online or I watched TV, I watched Sean Hannity?
Sure.
What's the difference?
Well, I think the major difference is we're not going to show any love for the nationalists, and you get this view of the Constitution as ratified when it was written, of course, ratified by the states. So, and we take it from the beginning, actually from the antecedents of the Constitution, all the way back to as Kevin gets into Germany and England, and into these great bedrocks of the founding principles, and all the way up to the present. So we look at issues from, Hamilton's Bank, for example, from a Jeffersonian position. And we look at, you get to secession. And one of my best lectures, I think, in the course is the lecture on secession, which is so much fun, because when you talk about secession from a Jeffersonian position, it all makes sense. As you just said,
right.
This compact fact actually says that this could actually happen. So,
right.
So I attack these things, and Kevin attacks this nationalist position all the way through, and I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and then it goes all the way through the Progressive era, and how they distorted the Constitution, and then through the New Deal courts, the Warren courts, the civil rights cases, and then all the way down to current events like torture and all this other stuff. So finally, thanks to you, benefactors of mankind, people actually have this stuff. So. Let's just cut it there, because we could go on forever, and
sure.
People do have things to do, I presume. So this is Brion McClanahan, everybody. Check him out at BrionMcClanahan.com. Remember, he's Brion, B-R-I-O-N. But also check out LibertyClassroom.com, where we've got our brand new course. We now have 7 courses. You can download them, listen to them in your car. You can be refuting all the myths just while you're driving. Absolutely fantastic. It is an absolute steal. It's the best thing in the world, and all the cool people, thousands of them, are already over there. So you can ask Brion all the questions you want and be taught by him, and it's just awesome. Brion, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Appreciate it.
The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Real American Heroes, and is co-author of Forgotten Conservatives. Darn, let's start that again. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. I forgot that title. They sure are forgotten.